Today, we'll look at the new evidence of mass graves in the city of Mariupol and sum up the tactical and strategic situation in the war ahead of the Orthodox Easter weekend. I also speak to Elisa Cooper, a Ukrainian chef and influencer who's rebuilding her career in London. She talks movingly about her new life and shares some top Ukrainian recipes.
This hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, I sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's April 22nd, day 58, and today I'm joined by Defence and Security Editor Dominic Nichols, Assistant Foreign Editor Venetia Rainey, and Mutaz Ahmed from our comment team. I started by asking Venetia about the disturbing revelations of suspected mass graves in Mariupol.
Yeah, so we've been hearing for a while that the Russians have been digging mass graves in lots of different places, but in Mariupol we always kind of suspected that there would be a lot of bodies. There would be a lot of dead people. You know, we haven't been able to go into this city for a long time. It's been bombarded for over a month. We knew there'd be a lot of bodies in the streets that would need to be buried. And we heard the mayor saying a couple of days ago that the Russians were creating mass graves, burying bodies in secret. And we've now seen satellite proof of that. So satellite photos have emerged showing about 200 graves, some of them in 4 sections, some of them 85 metres long. These are huge trenches that have been dug and bodies being shoved into them, basically. We saw similar things in Bucha. We saw mass graves there, although on a much smaller scale. And of course, we also heard towards the beginning of the war reports of Russia taking in its mobile crematorium. We weren't sure what that was going to be used for. We're not sure where it has been used, but we always knew that there would be an issue with having to cover up the death toll of this conflict. And I think that's what we're seeing in Mariupol now. Obviously, if we can see it already from satellite pictures, it's not going to be much of a cover up, but the question is when we'll be able to get in and find out exactly how many people are in those mass graves and be able to identify them.
Thanks, Venetia. Mutaz and Dom, do you want to add anything to that, or should we talk a bit more generally about the situation in Mariupol?
Yeah, hi David, hi everybody. I'll just add that this really does give the lie to what we saw from Putin yesterday. Remember that excruciatingly embarrassing stage managed, choreographed meeting with Sergei Shoigu as defense minister when he said that they weren't to take the Azovstal plant in Mariupol, and it was awful to watch. I mean, it was clearly designed for a little bit of domestic audience, but then there was this curious line when he was talking about the civilians still trapped in Mariupol and in that plant, and he just sort of lapsed almost into the terms and conditions, if you like, of his speech. He said, this is a quote: "The Russian side guarantees their lives and their dignified treatment under the relevant international legal rights," unquote. I mean, it's like he's rehearsing his lines for the International Criminal Court. It was just so staged. It was so forced. He also said, quote, "All those who have been wounded will be provided with qualified medical help." So, well, thanks. Marvellous. I mean, to not do so would be a war crime. So it's very magnanimous of him to say all these things. And then, of course, you get the satellite imagery, which I think, you've got to take with you've got to use your own verification here. Make sure that you're trusting the source of the information that's being presented to you. But I think we are now seeing the first evidence of a repeated performance from what we saw in Bucha, and it looks horrific. So I think I would judge the Russian military and Putin on the actions rather than the glorified legalese words that we hear from him.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we're seeing these images because of they're coming from Maxar Technologies, which I think is a private company. It's not sort of state intelligence. It's a combination of sort of satellites, new tech, high definition photos, and open source analysis and sort of geolocating. And it shows that in this day and age, it really is impossible to hide atrocities that perhaps in previous wars could have been buried. Mass graves before these technologies were available would only be discovered, sometimes decades after the atrocities occurred. And there's this intersection now between, new tech open source information and a very gruesome traditional way of fighting. And we're able to sort of see things in a way that I don't think we've been able to see with any previous major land war. So, it's good for holding Putin to account. Obviously, it's horrific to see, but this is a much more transparent war than I think we're used to.
And this has come out as we know that Ukrainian fighters are clinging on to their last redoubt in Mariupol. This is despite Putin claiming victory in the city. What's the latest that we have from the situation from the front lines in Mariupol?
So it's still disputed as to whether or not the halting of the Russian attack in Mariupol is taking place. They've said this morning that they'd be prepared to allow the evacuation of fighters and civilians from the Mariupol, from the Azovstal plant in Mariupol. But you've got to ask where to. There have been suggestions. Ukraine has been very forthright in saying that their people have been spirited away into Russia, and the fighters that have had to either surrender or have been captured. We don't know where they are. So this offer to provide safe passage out. That should have been there weeks ago, but it's not yet been taken up by the Ukrainian side. They're very reluctant to do so, given the history of what's happened before. So still mixed reports from the south, and not a lot of movement down there. We'll talk about elsewhere in the Donbass in a minute, but that's it for now.
Yeah, obviously, just to add to that, we had Putin saying yesterday that he wanted to ensure that not a fly could get in, and he sort of acted like he'd made the very generous humanitarian decision to not send Russian soldiers in to this steel complex where there are sort of tunnels and bunkers, and Russian soldiers would really struggle to get to the Ukrainians that are holding out there. And there are Ukrainian soldiers and civilians in there still hiding out. So yeah, he appears to sort of left it to fester, and we'll see whether they manage to break out. They obviously asked earlier this week for some kind of humanitarian corridor to try and rescue them, to evacuate them to a third country. I don't see that as very likely to be able to happen. Ukrainian forces have not been able to punch through to Mariupol until now, and it doesn't seem like they will be able to in the future. But it'll be interesting to see what happens to these people, several thousand people left in this steel plant.
So let's zoom out from Mariupol. What's the latest updates from across the Donbass?
So across the Donbass, as we've seen in recent days, artillery and air strikes ongoing. There's not a lot of tactical action. I was in a background brief last night with Western officials. They said that the Russians are still repeating the tactics we saw in the north of the country. They're still using long convoys on single-track roads. They're very vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. They say that we were told that rather than going through any significant amount of reconstitution, fixing the people, fixing the vehicles, reorganising the units, the new units, because there are some fresh battalion tactical groups, but also the regenerated forces are being fed in piecemeal. There was a quote into the fight rather than being held back for any further training. So Russia seems not to have learnt the lessons of the north, or if they have, they've just not given their people the time to act upon them. Having said that, we were told that in terms of in terms of the numbers, Russia has got a large amount of force in the area. We were told that they could mass the 3-to-1 advantage. Military planners would say an attacker must have a 3-to-1 advantage over a defender in order to take a position. That goes up as you get into more urban area and in areas such as the Donbass, where the villages are actually very close together, and anything less than 2 kilometers ish, then you've got this, a bit like northern France actually in the Second World War. You'd have this lattice work of a very defensible position. You could have a small number of troops with a mobile reserve using anti-tank weapons that could create a real problem for any attacker. So the 3-to-1 advantage, you'd probably need more in the Donbass anyway. But the point the Western official was making was, even though in just counting bodies and tanks, they might have a 3-to-1 advantage, they're not the right types of organisations. They're not in the right place. They're not using the right tactics. So Russia has numerical advantage, but is still not employing its force the most efficiently. If they made those territorial gains, they would be very difficult to dislodge because of the numbers. But at the moment, in the Donbass, we are not seeing anything like the combined arms manoeuvre, the tanks working with infantry and engineers and support and using air sufficiently that they need. In particular, the Russian Air Force is still very, very reluctant to operate anywhere other than over its own troops. It should be the other way around. The Russian Air Force should be dominating the air such that the ground forces are then have the confidence to move forward. But it seems the reverse, that the Air Force is not operating in any great numbers or to any great effect in anywhere where there is not a ground force to protect them. So Russia, got the numbers, still not quite got the operational art as it should be.
I think another thing worth mentioning is these comments that we heard from this top Russian commander this morning about trying to take all of southern Ukraine. And this seems like a bit of a shifting of Moscow's war goals again. So on top of capturing the Donbass, they also want to take all of the south, which they have taken a fair chunk of so far. Mariupol obviously is the sort of last holdout there, but Kherson we've heard quite a lot of has been occupied for a while. Mykolaiv. But in order to take all of the south, they would also need to take the area around Odessa, which they have not been able to do. We haven't seen much fighting there. And the loss of the Moskva warship would make incredibly hard to do, because the Moskva would provide aerial cover for any land troops that would be, any troops that would be landing on the coast to try and take the city. This Russian commander suggested that they needed some kind of exit into Transnistria, which is a Russian separatist enclave in Moldova, which neighbours Ukraine on that side. It's not clear whether he meant he wanted to create a literal land link and take all of southern Ukraine leading up to there, or whether he wanted to be able to create a sort of more economic blockade or just have the option to link up with troops there. But it's just another sign of Russia's war goals shifting, and it also creates a lot of questions about how realistic they're really being at this point. The Donbass will be a big fight. It's not certain that they will be able to take it, particularly with more and more heavy weaponry flowing into Kiev. Will they be able to hold on to all of their territory in the south? Unclear. They definitely don't seem to have the resources to be able to take more territory in the south, particularly without the Moscow warship. So I think it's interesting to question what the sort of official goals are and why they're shifting at this point, and what they really think they'll be able to achieve in the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Venetia. There's a few more international updates and diplomatic updates I think we should talk about. Dom and Mutaz, do you want to take this? Dom, I know you had some thoughts.
Yeah, well, firstly, I could say that in the last 10 minutes, it's been confirmed to me from the British Ministry of Defence that we're going to be supplying Challenger 2 tanks to Poland. The Prime Minister made those comments in India on his 2-day trip to India a few minutes ago. MOD confirmed it to me. Now, a little bit of confusion here, or that we do know. You can take that, bank it. Beyond that, there's a little bit of confusion, because it would appear that the Prime Minister has spoken ahead of the policy being absolutely fully nailed down. Shock headline. So we don't know if these are tanks to Poland so that they then push their T-72s to Ukraine. That would be the most logical explanation. However, there was a note of caution sounded to me that this might be a way of just bolstering the NATO alliance, bolstering that bilateral agreement with Poland, showing that support. It's more likely to be the former, I have to admit. It's more likely that this is a deal to allow actual hardware, T-72s from Poland. I think they have about 450. Did an article a couple of weeks ago. You can go and check that. To Ukraine, but it might not. So I just sound that note of caution about what the knock-on implication is if it's diplomacy or actual hardware. But yes, I can confirm that MOD will be supplying Challenger 2 tanks, numbers yet to be determined, to Poland in the very near future.
And there's also the news that Boris Johnson said today that Britain is reopening its shuttered embassy in Kyiv. It had been relocated to Lviv. It's now reopening in Kyiv. Mutaz, tell us a little bit about this.
So we actually commissioned and published, and you can go on the Telegraph website and read it, 2 days ago, an article by Sir Ivor Roberts, who was the British ambassador to Yugoslavia and Ireland, among other countries, urging Boris Johnson to move the British embassy back to Kiev. And his case was that of course, it's a risky move because Kiev is the capital of a country at war, and Kiev can the embassy would be at risk of being shelled, and the diplomats are going to be at some level of risk. But when you become a diplomat, you sort of, especially when you're posted to a country like Ukraine, which has been at war effectively since 2014, you have to accept a level of risk. And it's clear that judgment has been made that, on the balance, there's more value in showing confidence in sort of Kiev's future and Ukraine's independence than there is risk to diplomats. So governments decided to tolerate that risk, and it sends an important message. Of course, it shows that it's a sort of statement from the British government that it believes Ukraine has secured its independence and has secured its capital, and that's it. That's a big vote of confidence.
Dom, I know you wanted to speak about the new package of international aid from the US, and if somebody would like to comment, Venetia, maybe on the interview that Olaf Scholz gave to Der Spiegel, I think that'd be quite interesting as well, because we've spoken a lot about Germany in the past few days. Yeah,
so another aid package for Ukraine. We do have to keep up with this because it's happily, I think from our point of view, from Ukraine's point of view, things are moving at a pace. There's the new aid packages announced almost every day. So the United States last week unveiled an $800 million aid package. Last night they unveiled another $800 million aid package. So worth keeping up with it because the numbers are the same and it's easy to get confused here. But the aid package last night is going to include, President Biden said, dozens of howitzers, excuse me, and 144,000 rounds of ammunition. Now, depending on your usage rate, and the standard usage rate for artillery of this caliber in high intensity combat would be 6 rounds per minute. So 144,000 rounds, very roughly, gives you about 24 hours of high intensity combat with these things. Now, that would be one hell of a fight if it was non-stop 24 hours. But you can see how, if that was spread out over specific tactical actions over a number of days, the kind of figures we're talking about. So, I mean, these are significant numbers. I think the Battle for the Donbass is going to be very, I wouldn't say won or lost. That's too glib about the long-range fires battle, but it is very significant that artillery will play a much greater role in the next phase than it has in the defence of Kyiv in the north. So these dozens of additional howitzers, 155 millimeter, very similar to Ukraine's 152 millimeter. So the training burden is going to be lessened, and these additional 144,000 rounds, very significant. President Biden also said that the US are continuing to supply anti-armor weapons, and that they have supplied 10 for every Russian tank that's in Ukraine. So I mean that is quite a number. In the defence in the north, it is one thing to fire an anti-tank round when you've as Ukraine showed themselves very capable of doing, when you've crept up in these small bands, these infantry bands, these infantry teams. You've moved through the urban area or through the woods, through the rural area, and you've managed to creep up on these convoys. It's one thing to fire an anti-tank round when you are not in contact, when you're not being shot at, or you're under fire yourself. It will be different in the next phase, in the Donbass. It will be a different type of fight. And so those kind of numbers, 10 to 1, i.e. US supplying 10 anti-tank rounds for every one Russian tank that's currently in theatre, is about what you need, because you've got to train on these things. There's going to be some wastage. Some will be lost. We've seen images of Russian forces have taken some of these anti-tank and anti-air missiles. So those are the kind of numbers you need. We need to keep this steady drumbeat going, but it cannot be said that the US isn't providing significant leadership here. It's good to see. Others, of course, doing the same where they can, but we should note this. The other thing that was announced last night from President Biden is that there's going to be some ghost drones. Now, this sent us all into a spin because we hadn't heard of these things before, or we had heard of ghost drones and it was a different company, and we went down a rabbit hole of thinking, well, why the hell are they trying to buy? What's President Biden doing, buying drones from a company in Bedford and all this? Anyway, got it completely wrong. Eventually, we were put on. This is a company that's set up in the US, based in California, understandably, where all smart tech is, North Carolina and Virginia. Now, there's a lot of military activity in North Carolina and Virginia. I've been to quite, some of those bases before. North Carolina, Fort Bragg, massive training estate, some very, very specialised units there. You've got SOCOM, JSOC, etc., etc. Virginia Beach, very nice place. Go there in the spring, beautiful. So, if this company is based in North Carolina, Virginia, and California, it's probably got some form of soft special ops forces footprint. These things have been very well designed. We believe they're loitering munitions. Whether or not they are also the so-called kamikaze drones, whether or not they carry warheads themselves that can then be flown by the operator into a target, we don't know, or whether or not they might just have a very long loiter time. The Switchblade that have been sent out there have got sort of low numbers of hours loiter time, depending on what you want to do with it and the range and the temperature and the batteries and all that kind of stuff. But so we don't know how long these ghost drones can stay in the air, but we believe it's significantly longer than the Switchblades, and we don't know if they are themselves a weapon, a kamikaze drone, but we think they're day-night, so thermal imaging as well as day TV camera. And these are significant. I mean, there was some suggestion that they'd been built specifically for Ukrainian theatre. I don't think that is correct, but I mean they are brand new. I mean, this is not stuff that's in regular US or Western service. This is now being pushed straight out. This is the crown jewels of mini tactical drones, if you like, being pushed out to Ukraine. So I thought that was very significant. So keep your eye on these on the ghost drones. I think it was Phoenix Ghost was the full name. But anyway, have a look. It's on the wires now. It's on the news sites. We've got all our stories up on our website. So do have a look at these ghost drones. I think that's going to be very very important for spotting where the artillery rounds need to land. Incredible amount of kit going out there. Another huge package from the US. It is gaining a pace.
Thanks, Tom. Venetia and Mutaz, anything more to add on any diplomatic developments?
You mentioned Scholz's interview with Der Spiegel today, and it was the kind of stuff that you could expect, to be honest. He basically said we must avoid war between NATO and Russia, and Germany should at all costs avoid becoming a warring party, and that he's doing everything that he can to make sure it doesn't escalate into World War III or nuclear war or something. I think that's what everyone wants. No one wants nuclear war or World War III. But I think it will be interesting to look at in the coming weeks and months where that line is, as we send heavier and heavier weaponry to the country. Germany is doing it by backfilling other countries' supplies. So, for example, Slovenia is going to send, I think, tanks, and Germany will backfill their tank supplies to avoid sending heavy weaponry directly to Ukraine. But, the UK and the US are sending heavy weaponry directly to Ukraine. And I thought it was interesting, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was on BBC Radio this morning. He's a former Russian oligarch turned sort of Putin critic in exile. And he was saying that in Putin's mind, Russia is already at war with NATO. He's not waiting to cross a border across from Ukraine. That war is happening right now. So I think it's interesting. Of course, we'd expect our world leaders to be saying we don't want World War III, we don't want nuclear war. Nobody does. But the line between where war between NATO and Russia is not clear to me.
In the Donbass right now, there's a major battle going on between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces. Although it's not much of a battle, the Ukrainians are withdrawing and leaving, and Russia is taking over major cities left and right. Even when the Ukrainians were saying, like 3 days ago, they're like, oh, well, Russia's not going to take Rubizhny. They're not going to take Rubizhny. Rubizhny, major victory for the Russians in the Donbass, right? Major. They're not going to take the Rubizhny. They're not going to take Severodonetsk. They're not going to take these cities. And then, like, within 7 hours, they had taken the cities and Ukraine was in a full retreat, okay? So, given that, I want to provide a little bit more context for you here. There haven't been any major territorial gains since I last reported on the Donbass, but I want to provide for you a little bit of a deeper, broader analysis as to what is going on in the Donbass. So as you can see here on this map, again, this is live UA Maps. It's the Western recommended map website for the Ukraine war. The Russians are coming in from the east, moving in, and they are going to fully corral probably around 100,000 troops in the Donbass region. So they are going to create a double pincer, connecting the north and the south, and they're going to ensnare tens of thousands of troops in the Donbass. It is going to be a major, major, major surrender of Ukrainian forces when they fully establish the complete control of all, surrounding areas of those troops in the Donbass, right? It's not a good situation for them. The heart of the fighting is going to be taking place at Kramatorsk. Russia has already, knocked out a lot of their communication centers, a lot of their command centers. They've knocked out some of their transport routes for arms supplies and munition supplies in Severodonetsk. And I want to show you this video from George Galloway show with Scott Ritter explaining just how important of a victory and how large of a victory this is going to be for the Russians in the Donbass.
And let me ask you about the military situation in general. We hear that 100,000 Ukrainian army soldiers will soon be surrounded in what the Russians call a cauldron. I'm familiar, as you are, with the concept of a cauldron. The German army that was destroyed at Stalingrad was caught in a cauldron. Basically, the two sides of the Russian armed forces come together, and everyone caught in the middle is in a cauldron. How close is that cauldron to being achieved, in your view?
Well, I mean, I believe that it could be achieved tomorrow if the Russians are willing to take the casualties. But Vladimir Putin, in his address last week, made it clear that Russia is working on a timetable that is, what he said, very literate. And what he meant by that is by the book. And that the goal isn't just to destroy the enemy, but to minimize casualties. That there's no rush. He's not working under any artificial timelines. He doesn't care about what the West wants, what you want, what I want, what anybody wants. He cares about what's best for Russia. And that means that they are going to build up the forces necessary and then apply the firepower necessary and then slowly apply the maneuver. And I've watched, first of all, the artillery that's being brought to bear right now is unlike anything the world's seen since the Second World War. And it's intense concentrations of hell brought to earth, and anybody in their path is killed or incapacitated. There's no surviving this. And the Russians are literally going forward one grid at a time, clearing it out and moving forward. Their tanks are not doing the World War II charge up the middle where anti-tank guns can knock them out. They're using terrain masking. It's very slow but very careful. They locate the enemy. They move their tanks into a firing position using terrain to mask them, and then they kill the enemy.
100,000 potential clowns trapped in the Donbass cauldron, as they are calling it. This will be a major victory for the Russians. It is bound to take place soon enough. I mean, again, as you heard there, and as we have seen from the Russian military, not from all of the Russian military, I would say Ramzan Kadyrov and Sergei Shoigu wouldn't mind just going in and fucking shit up. But as we've seen from at least Putin and some people close to Putin, there's an idea that, hey, like, let's take our time. Let's not, sacrifice, unneeded casualties, unnecessary casualties. And let's just achieve what we're setting out to do, and it might take a little bit longer, but we're going to suffer less casualties. Why not? There's lots of people in Russia who just kind of want to go balls to the walls. Like, let's send it. Let's just, go in there and cause a scene, and we could take this easily within days. But that is not Putin's state of mind. I think there's more than one. There's definitely more than one reason for that. Part of it has to do with, at least it had to do, maybe not so much anymore, but with efforts at negotiation, with not upsetting Western states, not upsetting some EU member states. And really, they don't need to. I mean, there's no need to. They're completely fine. Ukraine and the EU member states are the ones who are running out of munitions right now and artillery. The cards are in Russia's hands, and they are, whipping them out accordingly. So this is going to be a very, very, very interesting story to watch. The collapse of Mariupol, the liberation of Mariupol, the liberation of some of these other cities that we've been following. Have been Izium, for example, or Elysium. have been really, really interesting and huge victories for the Russians. Kherson was really big. None will even compare to the victory that is that which will take place over the Donbass and the capture of 100,000 clowns in the cauldron, right? And as a final note, I want to remind you all that the fighting in the Donbass did not begin this year. It didn't begin in late February. Ukraine is very familiar with the territory of the Donbass because they've been fighting there against separatists in the Donbass, rebels in the Donbass for the past 8 years. After the U.S. led a coup in Ukraine in 2014, replaced the democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, with a puppet leader, there was some resistance in Ukraine, specifically in eastern Ukraine, where there's a lot of ethnic Russians, a lot of Russian-speaking individuals, and they started to resist. They said, no, we want to form our own independent people's republics. The overwhelming majority of them in 2014 voted to start independent people's republics, 96% in Lugansk and 87% in Donetsk. And though Putin recognized and accepted and respected the outcome of those elections, of those referendums, he said, no, let's try to establish peace. Let's try to work with Ukraine. Let's try the Minsk Accords, the Minsk II Accords after that. Let's try to bring about peace as we guarantee your freedom, right? Ukraine didn't want to have anything to do with that. They waged 8 years of war upon the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. They killed 14,000 people, slaughtered thousands of innocent civilians.